What's up, horror book fans? Pete here, and I am with Miss Laurel Hightower, who is the horror author that has written this awesome book, Below. Also, this other book called Crossroads, which Danny and I were just huge fans of. Below just came out this year, and she was talking about it at the Ghoulish Book Festival. We're going to talk about that too, but I just want to introduce you guys all to Laurel Hightower. Laurel, how you doing?
I am doing great. Thank you. Thank you for having me on.
Ghoulish was like already like almost 2 months ago, right? It was like at the end of May. We're getting through
What?
June
How
now.
is that possible?
I know, right? But
Okay.
what do you think of that whole experience? Like that was just pretty cool. Like getting a chance to just talk with these other writers and just have this real close interaction with fans.
Absolutely. I think it was the weirdest thing. Like night before last, I had this really crazy dream where I was like helping Max and Lori with the second one, and it was all insanity, and like we weren't sleeping and running around. And when I woke up, I was like pretty sure that was actually their experience.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it was, I mean, you just would never have known that it was put on by like two people and that it was their first time because it was just, I mean, everything about it was so much fun. I loved the campfire story competition at the end is probably like my favorite thing I've ever done at a con. Like, and it's not like I even told a story. I just like with the lights down low and the little like campfire thing.
yep.
Yeah, everything about that was just a complete blast. It was amazing.
Yeah, and it looked like you were really getting on with all the other authors there too. Like it seems like a pretty like close knit group, and
Well,
everyone's having a good time at that Mothman thing too that you had in the bar.
God love Brian Asman for going and putting together a costume.
Yeah.
So we actually had a competitor, who could win the shirt. Yeah, but you know what's funny though is with like when you say it looks like a close knit group, the funny thing is I hadn't met other than Cena. I had met Cena, and I had not met anyone else from that group. And but it's just like I mean, it's not that there aren't their issues, but as far as like the horror community goes, like every time I've been to a con and I'm a big I have a lot of social anxiety,
Mm.
and like I get real like nervous and everything. But like so Scares That Care last year was my first con ever. And
Yeah.
I walk in the door, I walk into the wrong place. I feel immediately like a moron, but Wes Southard is like across, and I'd never met him either. And he was like, "Hi, Tower, come over." And it's like I feel like everyone there does that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like it's just and I sort of try to follow that lead. It's like in fact, I'm pretty sure I scared someone off who was probably just wanting to just have her own time. And I was like, "Oh no, this person's alone." And they're like, "Yeah, I don't want to know that way." But I mean, overall, it's very, very welcoming. And if anybody wants me to not talk to them, feel free to just throw a hand up. I'll walk away.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what I love about the horror community, right? Because like I haven't actually been reading horror books for that long. I mean, I've read like a little bit of Stephen King and stuff, but really since like COVID is when I started to go all in and just start to read horror books. And we had interviewed Max for the first time for this channel. That was our first guest we ever had, right? Was Max.
Awesome first
And
guess.
yeah, I know, right? Right.
Yeah.
And he was just so cool about it. Like he's like, yeah, sure, I'll do your show. And then we interviewed Brian Asman and we interviewed Josh Mallerman at one point too. And I saw he did a blurb for Crossroads for you too. That
Yeah.
was awesome, mine too, yeah.
Yeah.
But like the thing is, the reason why I'm bringing all those people up is just because with horror, it just seems like everyone is just so friendly, like you said, and just no one's like judgy. They're just like, yeah, come on over, I'll talk to you. It's awesome.
Yeah, it is because I feel like we all maybe probably everyone still has that residual little like, first day at school worry like who am I going to sit with at lunch? Who's going to talk to me? Am I going to be on my own? Am I going to feel silly? And it just has never been that way. And like cuz I went to StokerCon like a couple weeks after and the whole Stanley event, it was just, I mean, it was the same thing. Like it was funny too, because I am that person who will never assume that anyone knows who I am. So like, I'll talk to someone I've talked to like 20 times and be like, "Hi, Laurel Hightower." So like I did that, like I did that to Tim Wagner. He was like, "I know. We've
Yeah.
talked." Like you like but I'm never going to assume that. I'm just gonna be like, I figure I probably dropped right out of your memory and I don't want it to be awkward. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. It's such an amazing experience. It really is. And
Yeah.
Ghoulish was I was telling everybody at the Stanley event, because I had my little Ghoulish program with me because that's what I read from for my reading.
Yeah.
And everyone was like, "Oh my God, you went. Was it awesome?" And I was like, "It was so awesome." And I feel like there's even more people that are super pumped to come next year.
Nice,
So
nice.
I'm really psyched they're doing it again.
Yeah, me too. Because I live in Texas, so I live near
Oh, good.
Austin. So like, it's actually a con I can go to, and so it's just
Yeah.
cool. And the venue was really awesome too, I thought.
Yeah, that is the weirdest building I think I've ever been in, and I love it. It's like
Yeah,
got it's so many layers,
yeah,
and to realize that it was built like that for the exact purpose it has. I was like, y'all got a bowling alley. What is going
yeah,
on
yeah.
here?
Yeah, and it was so weird for people that weren't there. Like there was a church there too, and so you have all these people doing like horror readings on one floor, then like a floor above it is people going to church on Sunday. It was weird.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was, but it didn't seem to cause any problems. So
yeah. So speaking of kind of like just getting into horror and kind of reaching out to authors, you're actually the first female horror writer that we've interviewed on the show before.
well,
So
cool.
yeah, yeah. I'm really glad that it's you too because I really love your books. And I think I was going to ask you this. Do you think that like the reason why like we even make that distinction of male writer and female writer and stuff is just because when it comes to genre fiction, it seems like when you say like the most obvious people that always stand out, it seems like it's always like these male writers from like generations ago. Whereas
Yeah,
if you look at like if you just go on Goodreads, for instance, like the top 20 like horror books, like most of them are written by female authors. It's like I feel like getting into the genre, if you're looking at it from a distance, it seems like it's like this male thing. But then when you actually are in it, it's like it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. Like, do you kind of feel that way or
absolutely. And I think so much of that has to do. So reading diversely is something that sort of become like really important to me. It was not something I thought of for the longest time. And I did what probably a lot of people do, which is like I love horror. I've always loved horror. I was always a really fast reader. And so I was like blowing through like everything Stephen King wrote, Joe Hill, Dean Koontz, Jim Herbert, Peter Straub, those kinds of things. I'm like, okay, now it's all gone. Like, what do I read next? And
right,
like you go to the library, you go to the bookstore, there's nothing else.
right,
I've read everything by Anne Rice. It's like, okay, so what next? There's nothing. And then when Whispers in the Dark got published, I realized, one of the big things that you realize early on is you're like, oh, this is, my job is not over. I have to market this thing. I have to get it in people's hands. So I got into the indie horror community, and there's so much more. And I've never been so happy to be wrong in my life. Like it just, to look around. So I feel like that's the thing, and that's why, like, when people and I don't argue with anybody about it because I definitely have been there before. Like, I'm not looking for a specific thing. I want what's good. So I'm just going to pick off the shelf. But the problem is the only thing that's on the shelf are these same like five authors. And there's
right,
no shade to them, no shade to the people who read them. It's, and no shade to the booksellers really either, because you got to stock what you know is going to sell, what's going to be profitable for you. And we
right,
want bookstores to remain.
right,
And even as a female horror author who, I couldn't get my books on the shelves at my local bookstore or anything. They just, but again, I'm brand new, whatever.
yeah,
And the whole diversity in reading thing is not something that occurred to me until I think it was Violet Castro. I interviewed her for a website I did a little bit of work for at the time, and she was pointing things out, and Angel Lewis Cullen and Sina Paleo, and I was like, all of a sudden, like, whoa, you're right. There's this huge gap in accessibility.
yeah,
There's this huge gap in, and so like sometimes when we're posting about like reading diversely and somebody will pop in and say, I just read and I usually will I will say like, hey, I'm taking this at face value. I'm figuring you're actually asking a question. Here's my experience. Here's why it's important to me.
right,
I'm not trying to make you feel like a bad person if you don't. But when you say things like, I just pick it off the shelves, well, then you are limiting yourself to that,
right, right.
which is sad because my God, there's so much amazing horror out there. It's
Yeah.
interesting to me that you chose to get into it during COVID, though. What kind of was the impetus for that?
That's a really good question. I think I might have kind of like a superficial answer to that. Like, I think that just with COVID, I started to make like YouTube channels. I had a different one, and like I would just go on Twitter a lot more than normal, right? And I was
Okay.
really into comic books, and I think that something that's very similar with comics is that the main public just kind of thinks of like Marvel and DC, and then they have no idea that there's like a whole nother world of comic book publishers, right? And so the community that just was the most welcoming just on Twitter was the horror community. And so like I would start to like follow certain people. I just like what they would say. I liked Max like right away. I started like when his movie came out, We Need to Do Something. That kind of got me interested in him. And then Josh Malin, I got interested in him right away. Joe Lansdale. I know he's all different genres and stuff, but like we interviewed him too for this channel too. And like just like they seemed like the most friendly, the most relatable people. And then so I just started following horror writers. So it's kind of a superficial thing. It's not like Twitter to get into horror, but that's
But
how it works.
well, and it really is. And this is the thing, like every so often I'll get asked for like advice by people like, in real life who are like, I want to start doing this. What's your suggestion? What's the big thing you should do? And I'm like, I hate to tell you, because I really bucked against it too, but get on Twitter,
Yeah.
because and man, I'm with everybody who has beef with social media. I completely understand. Jason Brandt and Chad Lutsky have a show called Bleeding Page podcast, and they talk about like marketing, for books, and they have like usually spend at least 10 minutes bitching about social media every single episode, which
Right.
I absolutely get that it can be a complete cluster. But every good thing that's happened in my career has happened because of Twitter. I met Josh Mailerman, and talked to him. Well, I've never actually met him in person, but we talked, and he, saw the stuff about CROSSROADS, and he offered to blurb it, and then he asked, or I might have asked, I don't know. Maybe I had, that maybe I did. I can't remember at this point, but it seems weird that I would. But he was, he was so nice every time I talked to him. And then, he and Ryan Lewis were getting ramped up with Spin a Black Yarn. And because I had met and talked to him, they talked to me about CROSSROADS, and, that's my media representation. And that's huge. And Ryan even said, like, when we talked after, like, we decided, like, yes, let's just sign on and do the whole thing instead of just, this one book. He said, he was like, this happened because of Twitter. He's like, that's the only reason this happened. It would never. And I'm like, you're totally right. It's the only reason I knew that Off Limits Press was opening. It's the only reason I knew Sam Kolyasnik. It's the only reason I knew who Max Booth was.
Yeah.
And it's, I don't know. It's, I just, it is the best free, marketing that you can possibly come across. But it's also, that sounds so, materialistic, I guess, to look at it just like that, because it's not. The reason that it works so well and the reason it's so helpful for your career is simply because of the connections you make, not because you log on and immediately throw a link at everyone you see.
Right.
It's because you make friends with people, you make business connections, you make, you meet people and write collaborations with them, and never see them face to face. It's such a cool concept. And yeah, that's always my big advice for anybody.
Yeah. No, I mean, I feel the exact same way. And I was wondering, because you said Spin a Black Yarn, right? That's like your representation. Is that like a label essentially? Because that's like the company that produced When You Do Something, the movie, right? Too.
Yeah. So yes, they're like a production company. And because so basically after BirdBox was made, and I think Ryan and Josh have been working together on other stuff for a number of years. But after that was made, they were like, let's put something together so we can have more of a hand in these things. Because, Josh, of course, extremely high demand, all of his stuff, all these books and everything. So they, they put that together. So I don't think that they will necessarily be producers on everything that, they get optioned or greenlit on. I know that worked out for that one. I don't know. With CROSSROADS, we've got, I don't know what's going to happen with that, but I'm looking at adapting Below myself, because it's one of these things, like I want, we want to be able to bring a written script to these places, and we feel like that might give a better chance. But yeah, so they did like actually do production on that. I expect they will probably do production on like anything by Mailerman that gets put up. But yeah, it's interesting. And Ryan is like, he's unbelievable. He knows everybody, but he knows them because he's like awesome, because he's like the best person. And he I don't have a literary agent at the moment, and I was talking to I was getting some advice from someone else who's represented by Ryan, and he was telling me, he's like, look, he said the first thing you need to know when shopping for a literary agent is there's only one Ryan Lewis. You'll never have, you're never going to find a literary agent that is the equivalent of Ryan Lewis. And I'm like, that's good to know, because yes, he is, man, I've just never had anybody give me such on point notes
Yeah.
on anything. And I mean, he did that for a novel that God knows if it's ever, that was something I wanted to sell. And he was like,
Yeah.
well, send it to me. I'll let you know what, he gives amazing notes. He's incredibly responsive. And that that's the persona too that everyone he's pitching to is getting,
Right.
so yeah, he's amazing to work with. It's just a very, and it's cool to be, kind of in the crew with like Max and, Jonathan Jans and,
Yeah.
um, there's Eric LaRocca and, several
Yeah.
others. So.
Right. And see, that's kind of the funny thing too, is like there is this kind of group, because you're talking about Twitter before, and it's like that's kind of the group that I started to just follow, sort of like, because you always get recommendations on Twitter. You always get people like, well, they're always commenting on each other's stuff, and so like it's that group that you're talking about. That's kind of the main group that I kind of follow on Twitter, is like that group, and it's like super exciting that you're talking about the idea of like Crossroads being adapted or Below being adapted, because I could easily see either story being adapted.
It
And
would be so cool. I'd be
right,
so excited to have that happen.
right. And the thing is, just like if we focus on Crossroads for a second, right? Um, I think that would work so well as an adaptation, and I think it would get a great reception just because of like how much of a gut punch it is. And I wish that Danny was here, because he kept raving about Crossroads, and he kept raving about how much it appealed to him, because he had lost his father in the past
Yeah.
year, right? And the book is so much about grief and just how overwhelming grief is, right? And kind of speaking of Twitter and stuff too, like one of the aspects of Twitter that's kind of upsetting though is like how like the world can seem kind of bleak. And I was wondering, believe me, I'm going to bring this all into a question here. Is like making something like Crossroads, right? Is that like almost like a cathartic thing to like deal with certain emotions? Because it's like you're like getting those emotions right on the page there.
Yeah, it's definitely, and it's weird, but I didn't used to want to do that in a way, because I felt like this is going to sound really ridiculous now, but I didn't want to put those emotions onto other people.
Mm,
Like I didn't want to be like, oh, I'm going to work out my demons and I'm going to throw them at you and you get to deal with them now. But
yeah,
when I realized, when I read other people's stuff, like when I read something that just really like, hits me, and I think the biggest thing that I keep seeing with some of it is like, I feel seen by this, which makes me feel not alone. It makes me feel like, wow, that, other people have this exact weird habit or this weird reaction,
yeah,
to certain things. And then it just makes you, and yeah, there are times, 'cause, I mean, I've talked about this in relation to Crossroads, but it took us a little over 3 years to get pregnant with my son, and that was hell. It just got progressively more horrible, and that was part of what I was working on the page with Crossroads. But at the time, I got so upset with dealing with people, that I just stayed home and wrote all the time,
oh,
and I wrote like a whole series, and I just at first I was afraid to put hope on the page. And then I just did. I was like, you know what? If I can't make it right in real life, I'm going to make it right here in some way.
yeah,
And, that's clearly not exactly how Crossroads works, but,
yeah,
I just wanted to kind of deal with some of those more intense, like, and the kind of fact that there's not exactly a black and white answer to a lot of things, because it's
hmm,
personal.
yeah,
It's grief is incredibly personal. And you know, uh, some people unfortunately get the reaction that like, oh, it's already been, 6 months. Why aren't you over this yet? Or I don't want to hear about it anymore. And, on the flip side, people who, you want to help people who are grieving, but it's so hard to know how, because
yeah,
part of you is like, well, maybe they're feeling okay right now. And I don't want to remind them, but on the other hand, you're like, but it's so isolating.
Mm-hmm.
you know, if nobody talks about it, if no one mentions it, if no one at least is like, hey, that fucking sucked. I'm here. If even if all you want to do is look at me and say, yeah, it did. Let's get hammered and never speak of it again. You
Yeah.
know, so sorry, I got in a diatribe about that, but
No, no, please don't apologize. I think my last question was just a huge ramble. I don't even know if it made much sense, but like,
no, I totally
um,
did.
no, well, okay. So I had two questions based on what you just said, though. So you said that you wrote like a series while you were, so that's not, this book isn't part of that, right? You're talking like a series that was like an ongoing, like there's like different parts of it and stuff.
Yeah, there's 3.5 finished manuscripts. I mean, when I say finished, that is loosely termed because
Yeah.
they're so like the first one is actually out on submission, but it's to Tor Nightfire. Like I submitted it like last June.
Okay.
So we're coming up on a year. I don't really have high hopes on that. It was just one of those things, the timing worked. I had just finished a massive rewrite of it. Again, thank you to Ryan Lewis because that was the book that he was like, you know, he asked me, he was like, well, what's the thing that you really want to work on next? What's your favorite thing? And I was like, well, this, you know, this thing. And he gave me notes. Like I had been working on that for years and just kept like getting stuck on it. And he was able to very clearly point out, like, well, this is what you need to do to fix it. Not I'm fixing it for you, but like, here's where you can really work on it. It was amazing. Did a total rewrite of it, was much happier with it. And it was 88,000 words instead of 129,000 words. So more palatable. So yeah, so that one is in pretty good shape. There are 2 more in the series that the manuscripts are done and have been through a few sets of rewrites. They will definitely need overhaul. And then about half of another one that I really like because it focuses more on one of my favorite characters. So anyway, yeah, I've kind of got this series that like I don't have any idea if anything will ever happen with it.
Yeah.
It's kind of starting to feel like my white whale a little bit.
Yeah.
But you know, it's something, it's kind of more in line with Whispers in the Dark a little bit. You know, they're not novellas, they're significantly longer. And I don't know, it was fun. I didn't necessarily set out to write a series, but I got done with the first one and I was like, I don't want to leave them. I
Yeah.
want to know what happens next, you know. And I just spent my time with those characters and I you know, I made things work out for them sometimes that didn't necessarily for me, or you know, anyways, yeah, that was my big therapy there. And then yeah, with Crossroads, like had I should learn, and I'll just say if you ever hear me say like I'll never do something, don't believe me because apparently that's the next thing I end up doing,
Right.
unless it's you know something awful. I don't want to I don't want to do awful things to people. I just mean from a writing standpoint. But you know, I had long said that I would never write about losing a child because it's too terrifying. It's too hard to look at, and I'm a little bit superstitious too. I was like, I don't want to speak its name. You
Right.
know, I don't want it to look at me.
Yeah.
Um, but I have an absolutely wonderful stepson who's getting ready to turn 27. I have been in his life since he was 10. And when he was going through some of his totally normal teenage stuff, he's, you know, this is not some delinquent or anything, but he made some poor choices sometimes, scared the hell out of us a number of times,
Yeah.
you know, and some of that was what I was working on the page was just like, you know, my husband at one point, like every time there was a knock on the door, he was so afraid it was going to be someone coming to tell him your son is, you know, he's dead. And
Mm-hmm.
so it was kind of working through some of that. And, you know, contrary to my expectation, it didn't make it worse for me. You know, I was able to work out that horror on the page and separate it from myself, you know.
Mm.
So it's not that I never worry about my kids because I do, you know, he's 27. You know, he has a biological mother, but he's always going to be my eldest. And, you know, I've got my 4-year-old. So they're, you know, yeah, I am armed to the teeth to fight on their behalf. But you know,
Nice.
it was cool to work some of that stuff out. You know,
Yeah. Well, you know, with that, with like the emotion behind it and dealing with those kind of those fears of that ever possibly happening, I think what's interesting because as far as books that I've read, I don't think I've read anything that is like Crossroads. I've seen like movies that kind of tackle the theme. However, I think that like in movies, a lot of times you have a character that acts a certain way, and then like late in the film, it's revealed that it's because of a loss like this that they're acting this way. But
yep,
with your story, it's like, you know, Chris is just like sitting in that loss, like from the beginning. And it's all about that. It's all about like the minutia of her days and stuff in that loss. And I'm sure there are books like that. However, I've not personally read them. And I think that's what was so intriguing to me. It's just like that every day going through it and just like how you kind of seem hopeless, like because I think when it comes to this kind of stuff, um, just the idea of the loss itself seems so powerful. But then it's like to see that it's like still kind of destroying you slowly. And I think that's essentially kind of like what the book is about, right? Is that like loss just like destroying you over time? Um,
Yeah.
and so that's kind of crazy that just like out of a hypothetical, you made that. I think that's really impressive.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I've been really appreciative for people's response to it, and some people respond to different parts of it. I've had some people who went through fertility issues as well
Yeah.
message and say like, man, this was us. This was horrible and people don't talk about it, and those are the most rewarding things to me in the world. Like, it's not that I don't like money. I enjoy money, it's great. But to me, this isn't what I do full time. I don't expect to support myself this way. Reaching people, having people have those same feelings that I do when I read other people's work and go, you put this on the page. You said what I needed to hear, to be able to do that for people. And when you mentioned the minutia of it, it was something that was very. I feel like there's a few. I mean, grief. There's a lot of different grief, and like like we said before, it's like it's personal, but
Yeah.
what I was thinking about with her, with what she, with what the character goes through is that there is a huge difference when you lose someone that's part of your everyday. Like if you lose like someone who's a relative who you love and I mean, that can hurt like hell. And I'm not trying to diminish that at all, but I think there's an extra layer that's added by all the places that that person suddenly isn't if they're in your life daily.
Right.
And he's totally fine. My husband was born under a lucky star, but he's had a couple of occasions, and one of them was, before I wrote this book. My son was about 8 months old. He was in the hospital and he was diagnosed with cancer, with leukemia, and I was just, I'm just like, fuck, it's like horrible. Like I'm like, oh
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
God, this is awful. I'm gonna I go home and he's in the hospital. I'm taking care of the kid. And then at night, like I'm just wandering around the house, like thinking like, because you can't help but think like, what happens if the worst happens?
Yeah.
And I'm alone and he never comes home or he never, makes coffee in the morning again. And all those little things where they're not.
Yeah.
And with Chris, I just really thought about how that, affects you if there is just no hope and how, I wondered, like, I was like, I don't think I could face that head on every day. And she really kind of doesn't,
Right.
she does what she can to survive mentally. And
Yeah.
I think that's what I would be kind of stuck with as well,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the funny thing, right? Because below is a kind of a different kind of beast, but yet it is once again kind of like dealing with emotions. And I felt like I could kind of relate more. I mean, I definitely have that fear of something happening to my children, like I
Oh,
just point this out to the people that are watching that like I'm actually in my daughter's bedroom. That's why there's like dolls and stuff behind me. But like I absolutely have that fear of something happening to my kids. But like with below, it is also that idea of like that you just went through a separation. The main character went through a separation, and just kind of like fearing about like how am I gonna exist now that this relationship is over. And that kind of feeling I could relate to more because I've kind of had that feeling before in my life, And so in both cases, I really just love it because it's just so much about like the struggle of the protagonist kind of thinking like, how am I going to go on? How am I going to do this? Like, what does this look like? And is that in your other book too? Is there a similarity with, because I haven't read Whispers in the Dark yet.
um yeah, I think to an extent. So the protagonist in Whispers in the Dark is Rose McFarlane. She's a SWAT sniper. But she lost her father and her brother in a fire when she was a teenager. So part of it is kind of like that, she sort of looks at this, and she was horribly burned herself, and had no relationship with her mother after that. So she basically left like orphans and without anyone at that age, So in a way, she has just sort of like shaken it off and looked at that like, well, this is my life. This is what things are. Things are always going to be hard. Nothing's ever going to fill this hole, and fuck it. This is what I have to do. This is my life kind of. So yeah, I think with her, it's probably some of that, but it's not maybe conscious on her part
Okay.
because she's kind of more of the type that's like, you know, I'm going to keep walking up this hill even as I fall apart. There's nothing that's going to stop my momentum on it because I have to.
Mhm.
So I think she probably would not see herself in a sort of a pitying light at all. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's and Whispers is kind of some about found family too. Her family that she has at this point is very like cobbled together by with other people, and that's something. It was really cool because I had people tell me that was that they enjoyed that part of it. Because a lot of people have really weirdly blended families, and it's easy to feel left out of some of the more mainstream narratives,
Sure. Yeah.
and I don't think that's intentional. Like, I don't think anyone's wandering around saying like stepchildren are worthless and you're
Yeah.
not a real family,
Yeah.
but you don't always see it like represented,
Yeah.
and I didn't even think about it with that, when I did it, but it made sense, in retrospect, because it's like, I've got stepbrothers and, and our parents are not, so, but they're still, there's people can just be part of your life, and there's something empowering about just saying like, fuck it, no, you're my person.
Yeah.
Like you're my person, you're part of my family, you're under my protection. It's this, we're just, it doesn't matter, and I don't know, I really love that. I really, of course, definitely influenced by being a stepmother, I'm sure, but it's just cool. I like that part of it.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to read it now, especially after talking about your other two books too. Like with that book, because that's interesting too. Idea is that she's a CIA. I'm sorry, a SWAT sniper. You said right, and so like, did you have to do like crazy research for that too?
Yeah. I mean, I did a lot of reading. With that kind of thing, because it is so, that's not a job I've ever done.
Right.
I wanted to, like, I read a lot of like first person accounts of people who did it and had done it for a number of years. And I got some really interesting information from it too, like about just some of the stuff that, that people like their thought processes on a daily basis and how things worked. And kind of part of what had me set it in Memphis too was that I had at the time I had a friend who was a SWAT team member. They didn't call it SWAT. I forget what the name of the team was, but for the Shelby County Sheriff Department in Memphis, and so I went down to hang out with him some and kind of like check out the city. And he would, it was really cool because he like was wanting to write. So and my husband at the time worked third shift. So we were like, it was always up at weird hours. And so was he. So he would like send me a question and be like, so what kind of thing would you do with this scene? I'd be like, okay, I'd do this. Now, what does it look like when you're actually, and it was just really like, so that was very helpful to have that sort of firsthand stuff, because he was also willing to be totally honest about the stuff that was messed up about it,
That's
and he,
awesome.
he doesn't do it anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he was very helpful, and yeah, just doing a whole lot of reading on it.
You have kids and you have a full-time job, and you're saying that writing won't necessarily be like the main, money provider for you or whatever. Like how do you fit it in, right? Because you were like a paralegal, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm a litigation paralegal.
Yeah.
Um, so about a year ago, around the time that we were coming back to the office after COVID, um, I actually was very lucky in that I asked to go part time. I asked to switch to just working 1 to 6. And that's not normally a thing like with my job. So I didn't know what they were going to say, but they were cool with it. And so I'm lucky enough to like in my mornings, like I have more time with my son. I take him to daycare a little bit later. And then I have on weekday mornings, I'll have anywhere between like 30 to 45 minutes to maybe like 90 minutes to write. So, I'm able to sort of like carve out that time for it most of the time. Before that, it was really just like I used to get up early some, and write. I would write in the 20 minutes it took my husband to read my son a bedtime story and get him in bed, I would just go running it and just, get a scene in, and just
Yeah.
whatever I could on weekends. It was really just whenever I could. And again, it was just because it's my happy place.
Right.
It really just kind of always has been. Um, I may not always write for publication. I don't know what my life is going to look like, but I think I'll always write because I think it's telling myself stories. That's what it's always been. And so sometimes it's kind of fun to be like, you guys met my imaginary friends. You guys are there, you're getting along. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
It feels kind of like that. So it's fun.
There is a little bit of a crossover with Below and with Crossroads. In this, I know I already mentioned the idea of like you're dealing with specific kind of emotions, but I also think that like in both situations, you're dealing with these kind of like urban legend type creatures, right? And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and the way that your protagonists deal with them, it's the idea of like a person experiencing it, and there's not like a person that comes in and just does an exposition dump and is like, this is the Mothman, and this is there's nothing like that. So is that something you're like kind of intentionally doing of like either like using them as like metaphors or like making it purposely sort of ambiguous?
Yeah, definitely not the metaphor thing.
Okay.
Just because I just don't actually think that far ahead on
Yeah.
things. As
Yeah.
as far as Mothman goes, like that was just a cool element that I really enjoyed. And I was like, at some point I want to write a story that includes Mothman, but I wanted to wait till I had like the right things. I just, I didn't want to just write the same. I didn't want to rewrite what someone else had already done.
Right.
And it's funny because I do like occasionally, and I'll preface this by saying reviews are for readers. I never have any problem with any review that anybody gives me. I will never bother anyone about them. I'll never like, dox them, put anything on, because I know people can get mad. Even if I'm not mad and I write something as a joke, someone else might. So I'm just like, I just feel very respectful of that whole area.
Mm.
But it is kind of funny. Like sometimes people will be like, well, there wasn't enough moth, and I'm like, well, part of that is based on like reading John Keel's book. Part of what intrigued me and really like kicks me in the butt to try and write more about it was I was like, oh, there's all this other shit. There's all these other things, and he is obnoxiously ambiguous. He
Yeah.
just it's like you just don't know like what's going on with him, um and the ambiguity of certain things. Yeah, like um I I was sort of experimenting with that with Crossroads because I have lifelong been an incredibly literal person. I had such a hard time in childhood with like nursery rhymes and because I was like, I don't understand. You're telling me that these parents let these children out into the woods. They're following breadcrumbs for what the fuck? Like bothered me. I didn't
Yeah.
ever just like, wow, that was a story. Later I was like, I don't think I get the physics of this. So
Yeah.
ambiguous stories used to drive me up the wall. I was like, I hate this. I need an essay on what actually happened.
Right.
Um, but then I was reading, I got into Paul Tremblay's stuff and I was like, damn it. Oh, but this is really effective. Okay, I like this actually, because in some ways, like, and I try not to be like, what was it? Who knows? They opened the door and no one knows what was there. But it's more like a little bit like, well, I don't know, what do you exactly think happened? And part of that has started to appeal to me because I also realized, like, just as a person existing in the world, we rarely get a full answer. We
Right.
rarely get like, and this is how it was. It's now been tied in a bow. Take this home and process it. It's just
Right.
like so one of my favorite horror books. I don't know if you so Jessica Leonard was also at Ghoulish. I don't know if you got a chance to talk to her. She's one of my Kentuckian writers. She's in Western Kentucky. Her book Antioch, so good,
Yeah.
and the ending is really crazy. And I was just like, at first, I was like, damn it, oh my God, it's genius, one of
Yeah.
these things. And so I don't know. I think part of what I've loved about delving in and reading all kinds of different things is seeing how many different places you can take it.
Yeah.
How many, horror is capable of so much. And with the reading diversely thing, that's part of it too, is I just really feel like one of our most effective methods of communicating with each other and knowing each other is through story,
Oh
you
yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And I think it brings people together, and in reading stories written by people who have totally different life experiences than me. It's just like, it's really eye-opening because you're not just seeing some news account of it that's clickbaity anyways and is written in a fashion to make people angry.
Right.
It's more just, this is my truth. Here is how it's conveyed in horror. And you're just like, holy shit,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's just amazing. It really is.
I feel a little bit ignorant though, because you mentioned a writer in there, and I guess they wrote a Mothman book. What would you say? It wasn't John Cleese, but it sounded like John Cleese. What was his name?
Oh, I'm sorry. John Keel. Look at me just
Yeah.
assuming everyone can read my mind, right? This
Uh,
one book that obviously everyone knows exactly about. So John Keel was actually the movie, The Mothman Prophecies, that came out in like 2002, was based on his book.
okay.
Um, he was actually in Point Pleasant in 68 and 69 when all of that stuff was happening. He's the one who recorded it.
Okay.
And he's the one who sort of dissected, because it went on for like 13 months. And he was already like I don't know if you would call him an ufologist because he like explored that stuff. I never exactly get the impression that he was ever fully sold on anything. So he
Yeah.
was more just like, like I take it as a firsthand nonfiction account. I just take it at his word that these are the things that happened. And so, yeah, reading the book was very interesting and very eye opening. I gotta say, I mean, yeah, you got to get past the ego that's on the page. God love him, but
Yeah.
it's, you set aside that part, and it's really interesting because there's so much more that's involved in it, and the conclusion he kind of came to wasn't really even that, that Mothman was the big thing he was even dealing with. It was just very interesting. And there was a lot of shit that was just so like, what the hell? There is something going on here that is well beyond the capacity of what we can understand.
Yeah.
And I love that stuff because I believe in ghosts, and I think it's really cool to read about people's experiences with stuff like that.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah. I totally forgot about the Mothman Prophecies. I actually saw that movie, and I really liked it when it came out too. So it's like, is he kind of, is Richard Gere kind of based on him in the movie?
Like probably in small parts, but not really,
Okay.
because he was more of a yeah, I mean, I think like some of the events sort of centered around him in a way that he didn't mean to happen or anticipate or try to make happen. So
Yeah.
that part of is probably like it, but he was a little bit more of a scientist, a little bit more of an explorer, of it, and sort of more of like a collector of information.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, I'd say it's probably somewhat loosely based on him, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't. I liked what they did with it. I actually revisited that fairly recently, because I hadn't seen it in at least a decade. And I feel like it really holds up.
Yeah.
And I feel like that they, obviously a lot of stuff in Keel's book is left out, but I feel like, well, duh, because you have to tell a story that begins and ends in a reasonable time frame on the screen,
Right.
so you adapt it for what's going to make sense from that standpoint. So yeah, no, it's super enjoyable. I love that movie.
Yeah. Well, as far as your take on Mothman and your story, it's really harrowing what the narrator goes through, and she's on that freaking highway, and then she's just by herself, and she just keeps encountering all these different nightmare kind of scenarios. Like, how do you get yourself in that mindset to write that? Like, do you have kind of experience in the woods? Like, do you have experience like going through caves? I guess it's kind of a spoiler. Like, because that I felt like that was very, like, I was like in her shoes for that. Like, where do you get
Awesome.
that
That is very good to hear.
from? Yeah.
um, there's, I mean, a certain amount. So, like, I live in Kentucky. We have a pretty massive cave system here, Mammoth Cave, and there's like the Lost River caves. There's a lot here. So, yeah, pretty much any kid who grew up in Kentucky has been on cave field trips. And 'cause, Todd Kiesling, I don't know if you read anything by him, but he's an excellent writer, and he's also from Kentucky. And we were talking, about that. I was like, "Have you done those?" And he was like, "Yeah." He was like, "Oh my Jesus," because there's always a point during the little field trip and the tour where they turn off the light.
Yeah.
And it is so fucking dark. Like
Right.
when they did that to me as a kid, so like, and this is the other thing that came with being incredibly literal. For whatever reason, I didn't talk much and I never told anybody what I was worried about. I just internalized everything. So for me, like I was never able to be like, wow, that was messed up and have my mom be like, oh, well, it would never happen because of this, or, I just never said anything. So like I internalized that and immediately, like as soon as that light went out, I was like, if it doesn't come back out, if it doesn't come back on, we're fucked.
Yeah.
I'm like 8, like how am I going to find my way back? Like to the beginning of this thing, because there's all these like places to fall into and water and all kinds of shit. Like if that light doesn't come back on, like you're gonna feel really dumb, lady. Like hopefully they had some backups or something. But
Yes.
so yeah, I've definitely spent time in caves. Not like a whole lot, but yeah.
And your book was the first Ghoulish book, right?
Yeah. I didn't even know he was starting the horror imprint until we started working on this one, and he was like, well, I'm doing this thing, and he's like, so we'll make that. And I was like, hell yeah. So that's, I mean, that I lucked out super well with that. And Max and Lori are just, they're so good to work with. They have been doing this a long time. They are very savvy, they're very responsive, and they just have good instincts for like, this needs this, or this is not enough this. And that was part of it, is I was like, I knew I could trust him to like tell me if it sucked, because I don't want to put out something that sucks. So
Yeah. Well, so what is next then? What do you got next on the plate?
well, I have a number of short stories coming out this year. And then what I am working on right now is a novella that is under like kind of like a verbal contract with another publisher. And that will, I don't know if it'll come out like late this year or very early next year. But yeah, that's kind of just tackling like kind of another little, group of fears of mine of, some of it. I don't want to like, say a whole lot about it because I'm still writing it, but it kind of deals with sort of like the isolation of parenthood and like kind of like just generally mom guilt, and how very overwhelming and insidious that can be. And just kind of the fact that we were really never meant to parent in isolation. It was kind of, it was really never meant to be that way. But I think a lot of us are in positions where we don't feel like we have anything to fall back on, and we just do everything ourselves. So, just kind of tackling some of that of it.
Okay. If you're ever interested in coming back on, I would love to read Whispers in the Dark, and then I know Danny would love to talk to you too. And then maybe if this book is out by then too, we could talk about that book too.
Sure, that would be wonderful. I'd love to.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show and talking with me. And like I said, I love Below. I love Crossroads. Danny really loved Crossroads too. And just, I'll leave in the description below, like a link to your website and then also your Twitter account. So if people are just learning about you through the Lastercast, they can check out your stuff.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I really appreciate you having me on.